He arrived at the mansion every morning before the sun rose. The roads were quiet, the air cold and crisp, and only the faint sounds of distant traffic could be heard. He had learned to move with the rhythm of the city waking up, making sure he reached the mansion just as the first light brushed the rooftops. To the world, he was just a janitor, a man doing his job in silence. But behind the calm expression and worn clothes, he carried the weight of a life full of responsibilities. His young child was waiting for him at home, and every coin he earned mattered. Walking through the massive doors of the mansion was always a strange feeling. He admired the grand chandeliers, the polished floors that reflected every movement, and the quiet elegance that seemed to hold secrets in every corner. The staff often ignored him, treating him like he was invisible, which was fine with him. He preferred to keep to himself, observing rather than being observed. But today something felt different. Whispers floated through the hallway. Other staff were talking about the billionaire's daughter, who had a reputation for being impossible to wake. He had heard the stories before. Some mornings, her father had tried everything from alarms to loud music, yet she remained fast asleep, oblivious to the world. He paused for a moment, leaning against the wall, listening to the gossip. The staff laughed at the idea that anyone could wake her without angering her. Then one of them mentioned him almost jokingly, suggesting he could try. He frowned. He had never thought of himself as anyone special. He was just a man trying to survive and provide for his child. But something stirred inside him, a quiet confidence that came from knowing people and understanding routines. He had a way of noticing patterns, of understanding human nature, even without words. Later that day, the billionaire himself approached him. A tall, imposing man with a commanding presence. He looked down at the janitor with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. "I've tried everything and nothing works," he said. "They say you think you can wake my daughter. Is that true?" The janitor simply nodded, keeping his voice low but firm. He didn't boast or explain. He didn't need to. His actions would speak for him. The billionaire's brow furrowed. No one had ever accepted this challenge, and many had tried and failed. He decided to let it happen, if only to satisfy his curiosity. The janitor was given permission to enter her room the next morning. Other staff whispered and shook their heads, certain it would end in failure. But the janitor didn't listen. He went home that evening, carrying the weight of expectation but also a strange sense of purpose. At home, he prepared carefully. He thought about her habits, about the stories he had heard, and about the subtle details that might help. He considered her likes and dislikes, the way people react when gently nudged versus shouted at, and the quiet power of patience. He didn't have an elaborate plan, just a deep understanding that people respond to respect and empathy. He packed his cleaning supplies as usual but also brought along a notebook, where he had sketched ideas and observed details about her room layout from what he had seen. That night he barely slept. Not because he was nervous about facing the billionaire, but because he was thinking about the challenge in a way he never had before. This wasn't just about cleaning floors or emptying trash. It was about understanding a person, reading subtle cues, and finding a connection without words. He thought about his child, about how gentle persistence often works better than loud commands, and about how small gestures can create big changes. Morning came, and the mansion was still quiet, the kind of quiet that felt almost sacred. The janitor arrived, moving through the halls with care, every step deliberate. The staff watched him curiously, some smirking, some doubtful. He ignored them all. He approached the door to the billionaire's daughter's room, pausing for a moment to listen. The room was silent, but he knew that silence could be deceiving. He knew that beneath it, there was life, just waiting for the right spark. He opened the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. The room was enormous, with sunlight filtering through thick curtains, painting soft patterns on the floor. Furniture gleamed, and personal items were scattered in a way that spoke of a teenager's life. Messy yet deliberate. She was there, fast asleep, her breathing steady and deep, completely unaware of the world outside her bed. He observed her quietly, noting the way she held herself even in sleep, the small movements that hinted at her dreams, and the subtle reactions to the morning light. Then he began his work. Not with force, not with shouting, not with alarms. He spoke softly, almost to himself at first, adjusting small details in the room, gently opening the curtains to let light flow in, moving objects slightly to create subtle sounds that were familiar and comforting. Minutes passed and still she slept. But he didn't rush. He waited, understanding that patience was his ally. He whispered a few words, soft and calm, mentioning her favorite things, stories she had heard from her father, even small jokes he had picked up from the staff. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, her eyelids twitched. He noticed every reaction, every movement, and adjusted his approach accordingly. The billionaire watched from a distance, astonished. He had never seen anyone attempt this with such calm and focus. Other staff had tried brute force, but this man used observation, care, and timing. It was a quiet battle of wits and patience, and the janitor seemed to be winning in a way no one expected. As moments turned into longer minutes, the first sign of success appeared. Her fingers twitched, and her eyes fluttered open slightly. He didn't press further. He merely let the light and his quiet presence do the work. Finally, her eyes opened fully, and she looked around, slightly confused but not startled. The janitor smiled gently, nodding in acknowledgement, and backed away slowly, leaving the space for her to adjust. The billionaire could hardly believe it. The impossible had happened. The janitor had done what no one else could. Not through force, not through threats, not through wealth or authority, but through understanding, observation, and quiet persistence. He had earned a respect that no one had expected to give. And as the janitor walked away, returning to his regular duties, he carried more than satisfaction. He carried a lesson that would stay with him. Even the smallest, simplest actions, when guided by empathy and patience, could create unbelievable results. He returned to his work quietly, just a janitor to the world, but someone who had quietly changed the course of that morning in a way no one would ever forget. The next morning arrived, gray and misty, with dew still clinging to the grass and the faint smell of wet earth in the air. The janitor walked to the mansion with his usual calmness, carrying nothing more than his cleaning tools and the quiet confidence that had carried him through yesterday's success. Today he had a new task, to continue proving that what he had done was not a fluke. The billionaire watched from a distance, his curiosity sharp and his skepticism still lingering, though less than before. Inside, the staff whispered nervously. Some were hopeful that this time might go smoothly, while others still doubted. The janitor ignored all of it, moving as though he belonged to both the shadows and the light. He had learned to blend into the mansion, to observe without being noticed, and to act without drawing attention. That skill, honed over years of working quietly and efficiently, was about to be tested in ways he had never imagined. The daughter, unaware of the new day's plans, slept soundly in her room. Her father's previous attempts to wake her had failed spectacularly, and she remained stubbornly unbothered by the world outside her doors. The janitor paused at the threshold, taking a deep breath, and reminded himself that patience, observation, and understanding were his strongest tools. He didn't need loud alarms or orders. He needed insight and timing. He entered the room quietly, letting the soft light spill across the furniture, revealing books, clothes, and small mementos of a life that seemed luxurious but also lonely at times. He observed her sleeping posture, the small movements of her hands, and the way her chest rose and fell. Every tiny detail mattered. He remembered what had worked yesterday, but he knew repetition alone would not be enough. He needed to adapt, to pay attention to subtle cues and respond in real time. He began with soft whispers, almost like a murmur of the wind, mentioning her favorite stories and the small adventures she liked to imagine. He added tiny movements in the room, subtly shifting curtains and opening a window to let the cool morning air enter, careful not to startle her. He used the light as a tool, angling it just so, until it caressed her face gently. Slowly, he noticed her fingers twitching and her eyes fluttering, the first signs of awakening. But she wasn't fully awake yet. He understood that this was the delicate moment, when impatience could ruin everything. He stepped back and watched, letting her transition naturally from deep sleep to light awareness. His presence was calm and steady, a quiet anchor in the storm of her half-conscious state. Minutes passed and he tried something new. He moved closer, speaking softly, telling her small truths that anyone might overlook, but that she would find comforting. A reminder of a favorite book, a playful memory from a game, a subtle compliment about something she had done well. He knew that recognition, even for the smallest things, could stir a person to action. Her eyelids opened wider, and she turned slightly, sensing the world around her but still unsure of what was real. The janitor remained patient, allowing her to take her time. No sudden movements, no loud interruptions, just gentle guidance. He noticed a small smile beginning to form, almost imperceptible, as though she was responding to the familiarity and kindness in his voice. The billionaire, watching from a balcony, could hardly contain his astonishment. He had seen powerful people fail, he had seen expensive gadgets fail, and yet here was a man who did not wield money or authority, simply using empathy and understanding to achieve what others could not. He could see the daughter stirring, almost magically responding to a combination of patience, observation, and quiet attention. The janitor continued, carefully adjusting his approach as she moved from half-sleep to awareness. He spoke softly, making sure his tone was never demanding, always guiding. He observed her reactions, noting the smallest changes in expression, the slight movements of her body, and the shifts in breathing. Each cue informed his next action, creating a delicate dance between awakening and respect. As the minutes continued, the daughter's eyes opened fully, and she stretched slowly, blinking against the light, looking around with a mixture of confusion and wonder. The janitor stepped back, letting her adjust to the morning, and then spoke one final time, congratulating her gently for waking. He offered no judgment, no scolding, just calm acknowledgement of a small victory. The staff, watching from the hallway, whispered in awe. None of them had ever seen this approach work so well. The janitor had demonstrated a skill far beyond cleaning or tidying. He had shown the power of patience, empathy, and careful observation. And while he returned to his duties quietly, there was a new respect in the air. The daughter, now fully awake, looked at him with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. She had never considered the janitor as someone who could impact her day in such a meaningful way. A subtle connection was formed, not through words, but through understanding and timing. She felt seen and respected, something she rarely experienced even in her luxurious life. The billionaire, still watching, realized that he had underestimated the power of simple human understanding. Money and status could not replace attention, patience, and empathy. He felt a quiet respect for the janitor, a man who had demonstrated something that wealth alone could not buy. After breakfast, the janitor continued his regular duties, but the mansion felt different. There was a subtle shift in how people looked at him, a newfound recognition of his abilities. He moved through the halls quietly, cleaning, tidying, and observing, but with a quiet pride in knowing he had achieved something remarkable without fanfare or recognition. By evening, he returned home, greeted by his child's smile and the comforting familiarity of their small home. The day had been unusual, full of small victories and subtle triumphs, but he carried the lessons with him. Understanding, patience, and quiet observation could achieve what many thought impossible. He thought about tomorrow, about the continued challenges ahead, and felt prepared. Not because he had wealth or status, but because he had insight, empathy, and the determination to approach every task, no matter how impossible it seemed, with care and attention. And so, the day ended, not with grandeur or celebration, but with quiet accomplishment and the knowledge that small, careful actions could create big, lasting change. The janitor had proven his worth in ways no one had expected, and the mansion would never look at him the same way again. The next day dawned with a soft, golden light, filling the mansion's tall windows with warmth. The janitor walked through the grand hallways with his usual quiet confidence, carrying only his tools and a small notebook filled with observations. Today would be different. The challenge was no longer just waking the daughter once. It was proving that understanding and patience could consistently achieve what others deemed impossible. As he passed by the staff, whispers followed him. Some were intrigued, some skeptical, and a few openly mocked the idea that a janitor could continue to succeed where everyone else had failed. He ignored them all, moving as if he were part of the walls themselves, blending into the mansion while carefully studying the environment around him. The daughter's room awaited, silent except for the faint hum of the morning. Her father, the billionaire, observed from a distance, curiosity etched into his expression. He had watched twice before, and though he remained impressed, a part of him doubted whether the results could be replicated. The janitor paused at the doorway, taking a slow breath, letting the quiet energy of the room settle around him. He knew that force or loud commands would ruin the delicate balance he had cultivated. He stepped inside, careful not to disturb anything, and took a moment to observe. The daughter lay curled under her blankets, a peaceful yet stubborn expression on her face. He remembered the previous mornings, the subtle shifts, the soft encouragements, and the gentle light, and used these lessons to guide his approach. Each movement, each whisper, was deliberate, aimed at awakening without startling. He began with a quiet murmur, mentioning stories and moments he had noticed she valued. A favorite book, a memory of a small adventure, a playful phrase he had overheard from the staff. Everything was chosen to spark recognition and curiosity without pressure. He adjusted the curtains, letting the sunlight spill just so, creating a soft pattern on her face that would naturally coax her awake. Slowly, her fingers twitched, her eyes fluttered, and a small smile appeared. But progress was delicate. She stirred slightly, then sank back into the deep comfort of sleep. He knew this moment was crucial. Patience was everything. He stepped back and watched her, giving her the space to transition at her own pace. He understood that the slightest rush or insistence could undo all the subtle progress he had made. His calm presence, invisible yet reassuring, was his most powerful tool. Minutes passed and he tried a new tactic. He shifted his voice to a soft storytelling tone, weaving gentle words that were familiar and comforting. He described small, happy moments, the kind that bring a half-asleep mind to life without force. He noticed the tiny movements, an eyelid flicker, a breath change, a toe stretching under the covers. Each reaction guided his next step, creating a quiet conversation between him and the sleeping girl. Suddenly, her eyes opened wider, and she moved slightly, sensing the world but unsure of it. He maintained his calm, never rushing, letting the moment grow organically. He whispered her favorite phrases, subtle encouragements, and gentle praise. Slowly, she became fully aware, her confusion giving way to recognition. She blinked at him, half expecting reprimand, but found only patience and understanding. The billionaire, observing from a balcony, was astonished. He had spent years commanding, instructing, and even bribing people to achieve results. Yet here was a janitor who succeeded with nothing but empathy and attention. He realized that authority and wealth were no match for observation and care. The daughter, now fully awake, looked at the janitor with curiosity, her initial confusion replaced by subtle respect. She had never considered that someone like him could affect her day so profoundly. The janitor spoke gently, acknowledging her wakefulness without fanfare or judgment. He let her adjust at her own pace, giving her autonomy in the process. The subtle connection between them grew, a bond formed not through commands but through patience and respect. She began to trust his presence, recognizing that he understood her in a way few others did. After she was fully awake, he moved quietly to finish his tasks in the room, tidying lightly without disturbing her space. The mansion staff watched in awe. None had seen this combination of skill, empathy, and patience in action before. The janitor returned to his duties quietly, but there was a noticeable shift in how people perceived him. He had proven that simple, human understanding could achieve what force could not. Later that day, he walked through the hallways, reflecting on the morning. He had learned more about observation, timing, and the quiet power of understanding people. He knew that these skills were not just for waking a stubborn teenager but for navigating life itself. Every detail, every subtle gesture, could have a profound impact if approached with care. By evening, he returned home to his child, feeling the warmth of familiarity and comfort. The day had been extraordinary, not because of grand gestures or wealth, but because of patience, observation, and quiet action. He thought about tomorrow, about continuing to refine his approach and understanding, and felt prepared for any challenge. He knew that empathy and patience could accomplish the unbelievable, and he had seen it with his own eyes. That night, as he prepared for bed, he reflected on the small victories and the lessons learned. Understanding others, even in subtle ways, could create profound changes. The daughter's eyes, the slight twitch of her fingers, and her eventual recognition had all been small signals that, when understood and respected, led to success. The janitor felt a quiet pride, knowing that he had achieved something remarkable without wealth, authority, or recognition. And as sleep finally claimed him, he carried with him the certainty that patience, careful observation, and empathy were tools more powerful than most people realized. Tomorrow, he would return to the mansion, ready to face whatever challenge came next, armed with knowledge, insight, and the unwavering confidence that understanding people could create the most unbelievable outcomes. The next morning felt different. There was a quiet energy in the mansion, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The janitor walked through the halls with calm purpose, aware that today might test more than just his patience. It might test his understanding and insight in ways he had never imagined. The billionaire observed him from a distance, leaning slightly on the balcony railing, curiosity and disbelief etched into his face. He had seen the janitor succeed twice, but he still wondered if this was luck or skill. The staff moved nervously, whispering about the day ahead. Some doubted that anyone could replicate the morning's success, while others were quietly hopeful. The janitor paid them no attention. He had learned to focus, to blend into the mansion's rhythm, and to act without drawing unnecessary attention. His task was simple in theory, yet delicate. Awaken the daughter without force, without disturbance, in a way that created trust rather than fear. He entered the daughter's room, taking a careful step inside. The morning light filtered through thick curtains, casting soft patterns across the furniture. Her bed was neatly made, but small items scattered across the room hinted at a life of complexity and personality. She slept soundly, unaware of the quiet figure observing her. He paused for a moment, studying her breathing, the subtle movements of her hands, and the expressions that played across her face in sleep. Each tiny detail mattered. He began quietly, speaking softly, almost like a breeze moving through the room. He mentioned familiar phrases, small stories, and memories that he had picked up from previous mornings. He gently moved objects to allow sunlight to flow in, letting the warmth touch her face. Slowly, she stirred, fingers twitching and eyelids flickering, but she did not wake fully. Patience was his ally. He stepped back, letting her transition naturally. He knew that rushing her would undo the delicate progress. He whispered, softly and carefully, words designed to create comfort and recognition. He spoke of simple joys, familiar sights, and gentle reminders of her world. Gradually, her chest rose and fell in response, movements small but meaningful. Minutes passed and he adjusted his approach. He added soft sounds, a door opening slightly, the distant hum of activity outside, and subtle light changes. Every element was calculated to guide her from sleep to awareness without startle or shock. Slowly, she began to stir more noticeably. Her eyes opened slightly, then wider, and she turned her head in curiosity, searching for the source of comfort. The janitor remained calm and still, letting her explore her surroundings at her own pace. He used small gestures, like shifting his weight subtly and tilting his head to indicate safety and familiarity. He whispered small affirmations, noting each reaction. She blinked, recognizing him not as a threat but as a presence she could trust. The room, once quiet and still, began to feel alive with the slow awakening of understanding between them. The billionaire, still observing, could hardly believe what he was seeing. No technology, no force, no money could have achieved this. The janitor's method was simple yet profound. Understanding, empathy, and careful attention to detail. The daughter's movements were hesitant but deliberate, showing the subtle shift from confusion to recognition and acceptance. She was waking on her own terms, guided by patience and respect rather than authority or fear. As she became fully aware, she looked at the janitor, her expression a mixture of curiosity, surprise, and faint admiration. She realized that someone she had overlooked had impacted her morning in a meaningful way. A bond, quiet and unspoken, had formed between them. She began to trust him, understanding that his presence meant guidance, not control. After she was fully awake, he stepped back, giving her space to adjust to the morning. He continued tidying the room carefully, paying attention to details without disrupting her environment. The staff watched, amazed at the seamless way he moved and the subtle connection he had created. They realized that his success was not a fluke. It was skill, insight, and quiet understanding. The daughter smiled faintly, a rare expression that carried both gratitude and newfound respect. She had never considered that a janitor could influence her day in such a meaningful way. Her eyes followed him briefly as he completed his work, acknowledging the effort without a word. It was a small, powerful exchange that spoke volumes about understanding and empathy. The billionaire, still observing, felt a shift in perspective. He had relied on wealth, authority, and force for most of his life. But here was a man who achieved more through patience and attention. He realized that understanding people, even in small ways, could create results far beyond expectation. The janitor had demonstrated something that could not be bought or commanded, and it left a lasting impression. Later, the janitor returned to his regular duties, moving through the mansion with quiet pride. He had not sought recognition, yet the acknowledgement was evident in the subtle glances from staff and the unspoken respect in the room. He had proven that patience, empathy, and careful observation could accomplish what many thought impossible. By evening, he returned home to the comforting familiarity of his small house and the warmth of his child's embrace. The day had been extraordinary, full of small victories and quiet lessons. He reflected on the morning, considering how observation, patience, and empathy could guide not only a teenager's awakening but every interaction in life. Each detail mattered, and understanding could lead to profound outcomes. As night fell, he prepared for rest, carrying with him the knowledge that even the smallest actions, guided by empathy and patience, could create meaningful change. The daughter's awakening was more than a success. It was a testament to the power of quiet understanding. The janitor had proven that skill, insight, and human connection could achieve what authority, money, or force could not. And as he finally drifted to sleep, he felt a sense of quiet fulfillment, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Armed with patience, observation, and empathy, he was ready to face whatever came next, confident that understanding people could create truly unbelievable outcomes. The following morning, the mansion was unusually quiet, as if it was holding its breath for what was about to happen. The janitor arrived with his usual calm and steady pace, carrying his tools and a quiet sense of purpose. Today felt like a turning point. Not only was he expected to wake the daughter once more, but the morning promised something deeper. A shift in understanding and respect that would ripple through the mansion in ways no one had anticipated. The billionaire observed from his balcony, leaning forward with keen interest. He had watched the janitor succeed multiple times and could no longer dismiss him as lucky. Something about this man's approach, his patience, his quiet confidence, and his ability to read people was extraordinary. The staff, too, moved about with hushed conversations, uncertain whether to believe in what they were seeing, but aware that the janitor had become someone impossible to ignore. He entered the daughter's room quietly, the morning light spilling through the windows and casting soft patterns on the furniture. She lay sleeping, yet there was a calmness about her that hinted she might sense his presence. He paused, studying her breathing, the subtle movement of her hands, the tiny expressions on her face. He had come to know these details over the past days, understanding the rhythm of her sleep and the delicate cues that indicated her transition from rest to awareness. He began softly, speaking in gentle tones that were barely audible, invoking familiar phrases, favorite stories, and memories he had gleaned from previous mornings. He adjusted the light, opening the curtains slowly to let a warm glow fall across her face. He moved carefully, subtly shifting objects in the room, all calculated to create a comforting environment rather than disturbance. She stirred at once, her fingers twitching, her eyelids flickering, and a slight smile forming on her lips. But she did not awaken fully. The janitor understood that pushing further could undo the delicate balance he had created. He stepped back, allowing her space to transition at her own pace. He whispered small encouragements, praise, and playful words, each carefully chosen to create trust and recognition rather than demand attention. Minutes passed in this quiet dance. He noticed every twitch of her hands, the movement of her chest, the subtle changes in her breathing. Each response guided his next action, a careful adjustment that kept the momentum of awakening alive without breaking the trust he had built. The room was alive with gentle energy, a quiet conversation between the janitor and the sleeping girl, unspoken but deeply understood. Her eyes opened wider, her body shifting as she became aware of the world around her. She looked at him, expecting perhaps impatience or reprimand, but found only patience, understanding, and calm. She felt seen, acknowledged, and respected. Slowly, she began to rise, stretching and adjusting to the morning. The janitor stepped back, giving her space, allowing her autonomy in the process. The billionaire, still observing, was struck by the quiet power of this man. Wealth, authority, and control had been useless in previous attempts, yet empathy and patience had succeeded effortlessly. The janitor had not only achieved the goal but had created respect, trust, and a subtle bond. The daughter looked at him with newfound understanding, a silent acknowledgement that he had impacted her day in a meaningful way. Once fully awake, she moved about the room with curiosity and attentiveness, noticing the small changes he had made, the light, and the order he had created without disrupting her space. She spoke softly to herself, acknowledging the care with which he had approached the task. It was a moment of connection that transcended the ordinary, a bridge between two very different lives formed in silence and respect. The janitor completed his duties quietly, tidying and adjusting with gentle precision. Every movement was careful, respectful, and intentional. The staff, once skeptical, now watched in awe. They realized that his success was not a fluke. It was skill, insight, and genuine human understanding. They saw a lesson in action. Patience and empathy could achieve what force, authority, and money could not. The daughter's reaction was subtle but powerful. She offered him a small smile, a rare gesture that spoke volumes about respect and acknowledgement. She had never seen someone like him. Someone so unassuming yet so capable of affecting her world with care and attention. That smile carried trust, curiosity, and a faint admiration, bridging the gap between status and humanity. Later, the billionaire approached him, a rare expression of humility and respect on his face. He extended a hand, acknowledging not just the success but the method behind it. Words were few, but the message was clear. The janitor had achieved something extraordinary through patience, empathy, and human understanding. No reward or payment could fully reflect the skill and insight demonstrated, but the recognition was genuine and earned. The janitor returned to his regular tasks, moving quietly through the mansion. The air felt different. There was a subtle shift in perception. Staff members treated him with a mixture of respect and awe. The daughter, now awake and engaged, regarded him with a silent understanding that went beyond the ordinary. He had created trust, understanding, and respect through subtle, human-centered action. By evening, he returned home to the warmth and comfort of his child. The day had been extraordinary not for grandeur or wealth but for quiet victories and life lessons. He reflected on the morning's events, realizing that careful observation, empathy, and patience were tools more powerful than most people realized. Small, intentional actions could lead to significant outcomes, and understanding people on a deeper level could change lives. That night, as he prepared for rest, he carried a quiet sense of fulfillment. The daughter's awakening was more than a task completed. It was a testament to the power of human connection, understanding, and respect. The janitor had achieved what others thought impossible, not through force or money, but through insight and care. He had proven that empathy and patience could create the most unbelievable results. As he drifted to sleep, he felt prepared for tomorrow, confident that his approach, quiet, observant, and thoughtful, would continue to serve him well. The mansion had changed subtly, the daughter had gained trust, and he had earned a level of respect that transcended his role. His work had impact far beyond cleaning and tidying. It was a reminder that human understanding, patience, and empathy were tools capable of creating extraordinary outcomes. And so, the day ended with quiet accomplishment. The janitor had not only met the challenge but had transformed the morning into a lesson of patience, understanding, and subtle influence. He had shown that ordinary people, acting with insight and empathy, could achieve unbelievable results. In the mansion, in the daughter's trust, and in his quiet pride, the impact of his actions would be remembered far longer than any ordinary task, proving that human connection was the most powerful force of all.